Thank you so much for that introduction, and welcome to all of you who are able to join us. And very excited to share with you how smart people use emotions to build better business. So through this webinar, we want to share several things with you. At the end of the webinar, I would like for you to have a simplified understanding of emotional intelligence. In my travel and in my work, when I speak of emotional intelligence, people often are interested and they say, yes, that's very important. But then second comes a sort of vague, what exactly is emotional intelligence? So often, even though we think this is something positive, it's difficult to really define and understand. So by the end of our webinar, I want you to have a very clear understanding of what emotional intelligence is. I'm going to share with you 15 social and emotional skills for empowered leaders. Now 15 is a lot of skills, but I'm going to share them with you and show you how you really focus on 2 or 3 at a time, depending on your situation and what the needs are. I want to share with you the connection between emotional intelligence and business results. Why should you care about emotions if you're in a business setting? And finally, I want you to know how emotional intelligence can be developed for effectiveness. So what can we do if we feel like maybe our emotional intelligence is not as strong as it could be? How can we improve that? I'm going to share with you some ideas. Now, as we start, I ask you the question, why do emotions matter? You may have heard, as I did, emotions don't belong in the workplace. Now, I've heard this for many years, but I have to tell you, it's just not true. The only way that we can eliminate emotions from the workplace would be to eliminate humans. You see, as humans, we are innately emotional. And so rather than trying to avoid emotions, we find that it's more effective to learn how to use emotions in order to get us the results that we need. Now, you may have experienced emotions in this way, when someone is upset or angry, and it's not very pleasant, is it? If this is your situation at work, you don't feel very excited about going to work in the morning, do you? So we want to look at how emotions impact us. To begin with, I want you to think of characteristics of leaders you respect and admire. And maybe this is a leader you have worked with, or maybe it's just someone that you know from afar, maybe through the media, could be a political leader. It could even be someone in your family who you admire and respect. And take a moment to think about what is it about that person, or maybe you have a couple people in mind who you admire and you respect. What are the qualities, what are the characteristics of this person that create this sense of respect and admiration for you? So think about this, and maybe even jot down some notes of where you are, some characteristics, some qualities of these leaders that you are thinking about. And I'm going to share with you a list of characteristics that commonly come up. So when I do the training like this in person, I'll ask the group, and we tend to have similar characteristics and qualities that are identified. So here's a list of common characteristics. Being a good decision maker, having integrity, being motivational, having a clear vision, a good sense of humor, compassionate, being a good listener, a leader who sets a compelling strategy, a leader who's smart, cares about the team, is fair, treats everyone equal, a leader who's inspirational. So maybe you had some of these characteristics on your own list. Maybe you had some other ones. I want us to take a moment now and look at this list and look at these different qualities and characteristics. These are of leaders that we respect and admire. And now I want how we might categorize these qualities and traits. So we're going to look at 3 categories. And I want you to think about the traits that we identified, and I'll put them back up on the screen in just a moment. But we're going to say, well, are these traits related to the leader's cognitive skills? In other words, how smart they are, or what we often refer to as someone's IQ. Is that what this trait is related to? Or is the trait related to the leader's technical skills, how well they're able to perform the technical aspects of the job? Or the third category, are the traits that we've identified more related to emotional and social skills of a leader, or what we sometimes refer to as a leader's E. And now we're going to put up a polling question for you and get you to give your input of what do you think. I'm going to put the traits back up. And if we could have the first polling question put up for our attendees. Do we have access to the polling question?
Ms. Lisa, I will request you to keep your presentation uninterrupted. We'll ask the question answers at the end of the webinar.
Okay, so I'll keep going. So I'm sorry, we don't have access.
After looking at the traits of respected leaders, would you categorize most traits as cognitive skills, IQ, B is technical skills, and C is emotional or social skills?
Okay, thank you. So be thinking about those 3 categories and look over this list. And really what we see is that the majority of these characteristics that are identified tend to fall into the social and emotional skills of a leader. Now, it is important that a leader is smart enough to do their job. It's important that they understand the technical aspects of their job. But we find that what really creates a sense of respect and admiration for us is when a leader demonstrates aspects of social and emotional intelligence. So having integrity, being motivational, having a good sense of humor, being compassionate, caring about the team, being fair, treating equally everyone that they work with, being inspirational. These link back to the social and emotional aspects of a leader. So we ask this question again, why do emotions matter? Well, emotions impact us in the workplace. And looking at those traits of the leaders, we see that most of the ones that impact us deeply and create admiration and respect, they have to do with the social and emotional skills. It's much more pleasant to interact with colleagues and with our bosses when they are respectful, when they care about what we have to say, and not when we're having those harsh interactions with one another. This really comes down to an idea that we quote from Maya Angelou, that people will forget what we say, people will forget what we do, but people will never forget the way we make them feel. Now, I think about this, and I think about myself as a young girl. When I was in elementary school, I remember being in 4th and 5th grade. I do not remember what I learned. I don't remember the subjects specifically or the information that I learned, but I remember my 4th grade teacher, Mrs. Weiss. And she was a teacher who cared about her students. And I remember loving going to school, and it was enjoyable, and I loved learning. And then I remember my 5th grade teacher, Mr. Endy. And this 5th grade teacher, he would stand at the front of the classroom, and he would cross his arms, and he would look at us, and he would tell us that we were stupid and we were bad students, and I didn't like going to school. I didn't feel excited about learning. So here are so many years later, I have forgotten specifically what I learned and what exactly I did, but I have never forgotten the way that I felt. And this is true in our lives. We forget what people say. We forget what people do, but we never forget the way that people make us feel. Another reason of why emotions matter is related to really how our human brains work. And the neuroscientists have studied this, and they have identified that humans cannot make cognitive decisions without also processing emotional information. Now, this might sound strange to you at first, but I want to show you in very simplified terms some of what's happening in our brains as we process cognitive decisions. So information passes through the emotional center of the brain before going to the cognitive center. So we have the thalamus, where a lot of the sensory information comes in through our brains, what we see, what we hear, what we feel, we taste, we smell. This information comes in, and it passes very quickly through an area of the brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala is the emotional center of the brain. It is the emotional memory brain. And after passing through the amygdala, then it goes to the prefrontal cortex, which is the cognitive center of the brain, where we make our decisions and we decide what to do about the information that has come in. And so you can see here, as we look at how the brain takes in information, the information always passes through this emotional center of the brain. And that is why we might have a very fast reaction, that maybe we see something that, frightens us, even though it might be harmless, but our heart rate increases, and we get nervous before we realize, oh, there's nothing to be concerned about. And that's because the information comes in through the thalamus, passes quickly through the amygdala, and maybe emotionally there's something there that's noted, and then it gets to the prefrontal cortex. So again, this is very simple look at how the brain works, but fascinating to look at why emotions matter, because the emotions impact our cognitive center of the brain. I want to share with you a brief video clip of Annie McKee. She's the founder of the Teleos Leadership Institute. She's a professor at the University of Pennsylvania and best-selling author on emotional intelligence. And she does a wonderful job of describing why emotions matter at work. So let's listen to what she has to say.
I believe leaders have profound effect on organization, and the mythology of the one powerful leader, it's a little outdated, especially because our organizations are so complex. But people who have a lot of power do set a tone in an organization. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the research that we've been looking at points to the fact that emotion actually impacts behavior, which in an organization, of course, impacts results. So again, if a leader can create an environment, even in a small team around him or her, that is hopeful, where there's a lot of enthusiasm, excitement, realistically facing challenges, not Pollyanna, people are able to think more clearly, they're better able to tap into their talent and their potential. It really is about creating an emotional environment that's positive and exciting and ripe with optimism and hope. If I could change one thing in the relationship between employees and bosses or managers and their teams, it would be to help people recognize that emotion actually matters at work, and we need to pay attention to it. It's not something that you leave at the door. Emotion is a natural part of being human. Our emotion is the source of our greatest talents and our greatest efforts. And if we tap into self-awareness and our abilities to create healthy relationships, we are going to create healthier workplaces. So if I could change one thing, it would be that recognition that emotion really matters, and we need to pay attention to it.
So emotions matter at work. And when we look at this, Annie McKee mentioned that feeling positive and hopeful means that we're able to think more clearly, we can make better decisions, we can cope with stress more effectively, we communicate with more impact, and we're able to be more creative. So I don't know for you, but for me, these are very important in my job, in my work, that I can think clearly, make good decisions, manage the stress, communicate, be creative. Emotions really impact us at work. So we have this idea of emotional intelligence, and there's positive things that we say come from strong emotional intelligence, things like increased leadership ability, increased team performance, improving our decision making, as we just mentioned, even increased personal well-being, reduced staff turnover, and decreased occupational stress. These are all wonderful things to have in the workplace. So let's look at what exactly is emotional intelligence. And in a simple definition, emotional intelligence is a set of social and emotional skills. These skills help us do certain things, which I'll share in just a moment, but first of all, just think about emotional intelligence being a set of social and emotional skills. Now think about all of the other skills that you have for your job. You have technical skills that you have learned. You have skills that you're using on a daily basis. You've probably become proficient at most of your skills that you don't even have to think much about them. Now, we all have these social and emotional skills. The good news is you are already using emotional intelligence, whether you have heard a lot about emotional intelligence or today is the first introduction that you have to emotional intelligence. You are already using these skills, and we're going to help you see how and show you how you can use them even more effectively. So what do these social and emotional skills do for us? Well, they help us perceive and express ourselves. So how well do I understand myself? How well do I understand the emotions that I'm feeling? And then how can I share them and express them with the people around me? These social and emotional skills also help us develop and maintain relationships. Relationships are really important and have so much emotional components to them. These social and emotional skills help us cope with challenges. They help us manage the stress in our lives and in our jobs. And these social and emotional skills help us use emotional information effectively. Now, I have highlighted this last point for a reason, because I feel like this is one of the most powerful understandings of emotional intelligence. Many people, when they think about emotional intelligence, they think about, oh, being emotional or not being emotional. How many times did I cry this month? Or how many times did I laugh today? Emotional intelligence is so much more than that. It's how do we use the emotional information that is present anytime there's humans present. How do we use that? Are we using it effectively? There's emotional information that comes from within us, and comes from those around us. And when we improve in our use of emotional intelligence, we improve of our use of these emotions, of this emotional information. We use this model, the EQI 2.0 model of emotional intelligence. And if you Google emotional intelligence, you'll find that there's a number of models out there. But we'll study this model today. And these 5 slices of this circle are the 5 components of emotional intelligence. It starts out with that self-perception, understanding ourselves. And then we have the self-expression, how we share ourselves with those around us. There's the interpersonal component. This has to do with our relationships. There's a decision-making piece, how our emotions impact our problem-solving decision-making. And then the stress management, how do we cope with challenges? And each one of these 5 areas has 3 sub-skills within them. So let's look at those skills a little more closely. So within the self-perception area, we have self-regard, self-actualization, and emotional self-awareness. In the self-expression composite, we have emotional expression, we have independence and assertiveness. In the interpersonal piece, we have interpersonal relationships, empathy, social responsibility. Looking at decision-making, we have problem-solving, reality testing, impulse control. And for stress management, we have flexibility, stress tolerance, optimism. So take a look at these skills and be thinking about how you use these skills in your daily life already. And remember, we already use these skills. And the more that we're aware of them, the more that we can be in control of how we use them. Maybe sometimes we need more assertiveness, sometimes we need less. If you are ready to present a proposal to a client, and then the client comes back and says, oh, we need 3 more areas added to the report, you're going to have to use more flexibility and stress tolerance and some problem solving. So you'll see that there's different aspects of these skills that come into play and are more important at different times in your life. Now, if you also notice the gray band around the outside of this circle graphic, we say all of this emotional intelligence has to do with our emotional and our social functioning, and this impacts our performance. But notice also it has well-being. And really, when we're using our emotional intelligence skills effectively, this has a positive impact on our overall well-being. And when we have that positive well-being, we're able to show up at work with more energy, more enthusiasm, more clarity, more creativity, and we get better results in the workplace. So let's look a little more at why do emotions matter in business? And I have 3 questions that we'll just consider in this. Think about, how do emotions impact leaders? So leaders often have a lot of responsibility, a lot of stress, a lot of pressure. The higher up in an organization a leader is, the more they have to maintain relationships with important people and important clients and stakeholders. So there can be a lot of emotions that come into play for these leaders. Now, how do the emotions of leaders impact team members? Well, think about if you are a team member and the leader of your team is really disengaged and not really, doesn't really seem to be present or aware of the team members and just kind of talks at you as a team member and doesn't ever listen to you, how do you feel? That's not a good feeling. You don't feel like really contributing and giving more effort to the team. So the emotions of leaders can impact the team members directly. And then think, how do the emotions of team members impact the clients? Well, what if you're on a sales team? Your leader doesn't really relate well to you and doesn't give clear direction, and so you're not very sure of what your job is and you're not feeling very motivated or inspired, and then you go to talk to a client. Well, it's difficult to communicate clearly with the client and you're not really sure what is it that you can offer the client. Are you empowered to give them more if they ask for it? So you can see here that emotions have an impact on our performance, and this impacts the outcomes that we ultimately have with our clients. I want to show you this chart this is a list of the top reasons for leadership derailment. And when we say leadership derailment, we mean that the leader has not succeeded. So here we have at the top of the list, indecisive leadership, lack of self-awareness, not reaching business objectives, a poor match between executive and assignment, lack of communication between executive and board, lack of ability to build and lead a team, lack of ability to provide change leadership, problems with relationships, lack of ability to delegate. When you look over this list, think about how many of these aspects relate to the emotional intelligence skills that we were just talking about. So right at the top two, indecisive leadership, lack of self-awareness. Well, part of the emotional intelligence model we're looking at includes decision making. And some people, you might think about yourself, how do you make decisions? And if it's a very clear situation and it's a data that if you're a leader and you have to make a decision that you know your team is going to be very frustrated, they might even be angry, they're going to be discouraged. Maybe in those situations you have a much more challenging time making a decision. Well, that's that emotional intelligence piece coming in. And that can really impact a leader's ability to make clear decisions. The second one, lack of self-awareness. Well, self-awareness is the foundation of emotional intelligence, that we understand and perceive ourselves clearly so that we know how to relate with others. As we look down the list, you can see so there's so much about communication, building, leading a team, change leadership. Think about all the emotions involved with change that we have to deal with. Relationship problems, lack of ability to delegate. So many of the reasons that leaders fail ineffective use of emotions and emotional intelligence. So emotions really matter in business. Remember, we said a few moments ago, feeling positive and hopeful means we're able to think more clearly, make better decisions, cope with stress more effectively, communicate with more impact, be more creative. These are incredibly important for us to be productive in our business settings. Now, I want to shift just for a moment, and I want to ask you the question, what's the difference between personality and emotional intelligence? Now, perhaps some of you have taken personality assessments over the years and learned that maybe you're an introvert or an extrovert, and how does this relate to emotional intelligence? So some of you might think, well, it's probably very similar, or some of you might say, no, it must be very different, and some of you might be thinking, well, there has to be some sort of connection. Well, if we look at the theory of personality, personality theorists say that personality is fixed, or it's a static trait. So when we're born, our brain is naturally wired in certain ways, that we take in information in certain ways, we make decisions in certain ways. And the personality theorists say that those traits related to our personality remain static throughout our lifetime. Emotional intelligence is dynamic. Now, let's talk a little bit about why this is important and why I bring it up. Emotional intelligence is dynamic. Remember I said we have these 15 skills of emotional intelligence, but we can't focus and use all 15 at any one time, so we have to decide, okay, which skills are most important right now? I have to go talk to my boss and have an important meeting. What are the skills that are going to be important? Okay, well, I need to have a high stress tolerance. I need to be assertive in this conversation, and I really want to have a good relationship with my boss. So we might look at that. And then you say, oh, I have a client to meet with, and this is a new client, so okay, where am I going to focus? I want to be optimistic. I want to be optimistic that this is going to turn out into a lead or a potential sale. I want to demonstrate good problem-solving skills. I want to have empathy for my client. I want to really understand. So you can start to see that in different situations we focus on different skills. Now, let me show you another reason why it's so powerful that this emotional intelligence is dynamic. We're going to look at an emotional intelligence profile for Mark, the computer guy. Now, Mark, the computer guy, took an emotional intelligence assessment so he could see in a graph and with numbers how is he doing using these emotional intelligence skills. And you can see here that some of his scores are quite high and the bars on the graph are quite long, and some of the scores are quite low and the bars on the graph are shorter. Let's look at the aspects where Mark has scored high. So the long bars on this graph. Self-regard, assertiveness, independence, problem-solving, reality testing, stress tolerance. Now think about Mark's job. He's the computer guy. Do you think Mark is good at his job? Yeah. Mark's a great computer guy. He has the skills he needs to do his job well. In fact, Mark is so good at doing his job, I bet you know what happens. He comes up for a promotion. And now Mark is going to be the new manager. And you're on his team. But I'm wondering how you feel about working for Mark. Because as we look at his scores, let's look at some of the low scores in his emotional intelligence profile. Emotional self-awareness and expression are quite low. Interpersonal relationships and empathy, also low. Social responsibility, impulse control, flexibility, optimism. I don't know about you, but I'm not so sure that I'm excited about working for Mark now that he's a manager. However, I have good news for you, and I have good news for Mark. Remember, we were just saying that emotional intelligence is dynamic. So, Mark can look at his emotional intelligence profile. He can look at his new job description as manager. And he can identify that he has some new areas of emotional intelligence to focus on. And he can work on developing those areas of emotional intelligence. Now, there have been a number of studies done that look at a leader's success. So we're talking about Mark, and we're saying, okay, Mark, he was really good at his technical job. And now he's promoted. So he's not going to be doing his technical job much anymore. He's going to be interacting with people. He's going to be leading the team. He's going to be giving direction to the team, supporting the team. So the part of his success that's related to emotional intelligence is probably going to be increased. There's a number of studies that have formally looked at this. This is the results of just one of those studies. And the studies look at, well, how much of a leader's success is related to their IQ, their cognitive skills, how smart they are. How much is related to their EQ, their emotional and social skills. And then we have other factors, and these include things like education and work experience and personality and cultural influences. So you can see in this study, 10% of success was related to a leader's IQ, 30% to EQ, and 60% those other factors, the education, work experience, personality, etc. So you might think, well, okay, 30%, that's not that much, right? Except for the fact that the emotional intelligence is the piece of this pie graph that is dynamic, that's most dynamic. So IQ, once we are adults, it's very difficult to increase or change your IQ. it's pretty much set for life. These other factors, education, work experience, cultural background, personality, many of them are going to be set. It's very rare that our work sends us back to school. It happens sometimes, but it's more unusual than it is usual. So this emotional intelligence slice of the pie is where we have the most ability to grow and change, which is good news because for top leaders, this expands significantly. So some studies show for top leadership positions, emotional intelligence competencies are more than 85% of what sets star performers apart from the average. So that 30% of the pie increases significantly the higher up in an organization one goes. Because as we mentioned previously, think about leaders in top positions. The majority of their work has to do with managing relationships with board members, with other senior leaders, with key stakeholders, with clients. So it's important for us to recognize that the higher in an organization one goes, the more important emotional intelligence becomes. Now let's look at how we can improve how we use emotions. Mark, the computer guy, needs to know how can he improve his emotional intelligence. He's become a manager and he wants to be a successful manager. He wants to improve in these areas that he hasn't had to use previously. So one of the things we can do is to improve our awareness of emotions. Throughout the day, we experience many different emotions, most of the time without really being conscious of them. So we can do an exercise where we pause throughout the day and we reflect. What are we feeling right now? Why are we feeling that way? Do I like how I'm feeling? Can I do something? We can just improve our awareness of emotions. We can also increase our understanding of emotional intelligence. If you are attending this webinar, you will finish this webinar with an increased understanding of emotional intelligence. So you will improve in this short time we spend together how you use emotions, because you'll be more aware and you'll be thinking about emotional intelligence as, oh, it's this set of skills, and I hadn't really thought about it as skills before, and I can work on skills, I can develop skills. So just by having an increased understanding of what emotional intelligence is, you will improve the way that you use emotions. We can look for coaching and training in emotional management. We can have someone to talk to help us better understand our own emotions, the emotions of people around us, how we can use that emotional information effectively. We can take an emotional intelligence assessment, just like Mark the computer guy did. Oftentimes it's helpful to be able to see in a graph, in a chart with numbers, well, how often am I using these skills? And we can also have a 360 emotional intelligence assessment done where other people provide feedback of how they perceive us using these emotional intelligence skills as well. If you're working with a team, you can have your team complete an emotional intelligence assessment. So as individuals, we use emotional intelligence skills, but then we also, as we interact with a team, we also have these emotional intelligence skills and competencies that we use collectively, and it's possible to measure those and receive feedback on those as well. Now, let's look at some examples of how some people actually do this. They improve their use of emotions. And I'm going to show you a video clip about some astronauts. This is a profession that really demands highly skilled emotional management. And perhaps you've seen a movie that came out quite a few years ago called Apollo 13, which is based on the true story of the mission of the Apollo 13 to space in 1970, and they had catastrophic failure on the shuttle. And fortunately, all ended up well, and they were able to return safely to Earth. But the scene that I am going to show for you in this video clip includes the astronauts in the space shuttle and the team that's supporting them in the headquarters in Houston. And notice the dynamics, notice the emotions present, notice the emotional management present as you see these individuals interact.
Well, between Jack's back taxes and the Fred Hayes show, I'd say that was a pretty successful broadcast.
Thank you very much, Houston. We got a couple of housekeeping procedures for you. We'd like you to roll right to 060 and know your rates.
Roger that. Rolling right. 060.
And then if you could give your oxygen tanks a stir.
Roger that.
Hey, we've got a problem here. What did you do?
Nothing. Stir the tanks.
Whoa. This is Houston. Say again, please.
Houston, we have a problem. We have a main must be undervolt. We've got a lot of thruster activity here, Houston. Just went offline. Oh, there's another master alarm, Houston.
I'm checking the quad.
There's no refresh now.
Maybe 2 quad.
We've got a computer restart.
Reconfigure the RCS.
We've got a fixed light fire. We've got multiple caution warning, Houston. We've got a restart.
All right, I'm on SES.
Jesus. Like your heart rates are skyrocketing. Econ, what's your data telling you?
O2 tank 2 not reading at all. Tank 1 is at 725 psi and falling. Fuel cells 1 and 3 are. What's going on here? Flight, let me get back to you. Flight GNC. Flight, they're all over the place. They keep going close to gimbal lock. I keep losing radio signals. Flight, they're at 10. I think 22. Do it manually.
One at a time, people. One at a time. One at a time. Ecom, is this an instrumentation problem, or are we looking at real power loss here?
It's reading a quadruple failure. That can't happen. It's got to be instrumentation.
Let's get that much. Let me hit my meteor.
Yep, the tunnel's really torquing with all the food.
Houston, we got a pre-alert bang here associated with a master alarm. Houston, we have a main bus A undervolt down too. It's reading 25 and a half. Main bus B is reading zip right now. We got a wicked shimmy up here.
Look out, GNT. These guys are talking about bangs and shimmies up there. Don't sound like instrumentation.
So notice the control, right? I watch that and my heart rate is increased. I am tense and stressed. And the emotional control of these astronauts and their support team in Houston, their voices stay calm. Houston, we have a problem. What did you do? I didn't do anything. I just did this. Like they don't raise their voices. They have learned how to manage their emotions. And this is an example of an extreme profession where they have to have the highest management of their emotions, but you can see how it's possible to develop this control of our emotions using that emotional intelligence, that high stress tolerance, communicating. They have to continue to communicate with one another, even in those high stress situations, being assertive, expressing themselves, problem solving. So it's a powerful example of highly skilled use of emotional management. very briefly, I'll just show you some studies that have been done. In New Zealand, Telecom did a study. 48% of what differentiated the high and low performing leaders could be attributed to emotional intelligence. So in this, remember that 30% piece of the pie? This was almost half of the pie for the leaders here. And they used the emotional intelligence model for training and coaching, which provided a roadmap for leadership success and better performing leaders. Through studies, they've said that star leaders add 127% more value to the bottom line than average leaders, and high EQ CEOs create more profit than low EQ CEOs. So we can even see a connection to the bottom line, to the profit margin of organizations. Now, as we bring this webinar to a close, I'm going to share with you my favorite example through a clip from the movie The Pursuit of Happiness of emotional intelligence in action. You may have seen this movie. Will Smith plays the part. It's a true story based on the life of Chris Gardner. And he is having a lot of trouble in his life. He's unsuccessful as a door-to-door salesman, trying to get a job on Wall Street. Finally gets the interview set up, but is prevented from preparing. He is in jail the night before for just a crazy reason and has to go to the interview not dressed in a suit and tie, but in his painting clothes. And he either misses the interview completely and misses his opportunity, or he goes showing up unprepared. And I think this is a fantastic example of how when we use emotional intelligence well, there is positive results both for ourselves and the people that we're interacting with. So as we come to a close, watch this final video clip of emotional intelligence in action.
Chris Gardner.
Chris Gardner. How are you? Good morning. Chris Gardner. Chris Gardner. Good to see you again. Chris Gardner, pleasure. I've been sitting out there for the last half hour trying to come up with a story that would explain my being here dressed like this. And I wanted to come up with a story that would demonstrate qualities that I'm sure you all admire here, like earnestness or diligence and team playing to something. And I couldn't think of anything. So the truth is, I was arrested for failure to pay parking tickets. Parking tickets? And I ran all the way here from the police station.
What were you doing before you were arrested?
I was painting my apartment.
Did you dry it out?
I hope so.
Kay says you're pretty determined. Oh, he's been waiting outside the front of the building with some 40-pound gizmo for over a month. He said you're smart.
I like to think so.
And you want to learn this business?
Yes, sir, I'm going to learn this business.
Have you already started learning on your own?
Absolutely.
Kay.
Yes, sir.
How many times have you seen Chris?
No, I don't know. One too many, apparently.
Is he ever dressed like this?
No.
Jacket and tie. First in your class? School? High school?
Yes, sir.
How many in the class?
12. It was a small town.
I'll say.
But I was also first in my radar class in the Navy, and that was a class of 20. Can I say something? I'm the type of person, if you ask me a question and I don't know the answer, I'm going to tell you that I don't know. But I bet you what? I know how to find the answer, and I will find the answer. Is that fair enough?
Chris, what would you say if a guy walked in for an interview without a shirt on? And I hired him. What would you say?
He must have had on some really nice pants.
masterful to see emotional intelligence in action. You see this man, Chris Gardner, walk into a room where there's so much tension. He's not prepared. It's not what they had expected. These men already wrote him off, but he was able to connect with them. He was able to manage and use the emotions that were present. He was honest. He was authentic. He was assertive. He demonstrated empathy, knowing that they were uncomfortable, problem solving, high stress tolerance, the optimism to just show up and even try. And it worked for him. He got the job. He became very successful, started his own company. But just a masterful demonstration of emotional intelligence skills at work. So in summary, when we can effectively use emotions, this allows us to manage stressful situations, and this is important in today's high-pressure economy. We can communicate more clearly. Well, this is paramount for teamwork, and so much of our work happens in teams these days. We can understand others for better relationships with our colleagues and our clients and our customers. And we can have increased creativity so we can solve problems faster and be more competitive. Thank you so much. We're going to take some time for some questions. You might have some questions about some of the assessments that are offered. We have 360 individual team assessments. And I want to just pause now and take some time for some questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, for such an intriguing presentation. Folks, we are now open for the question and answer session. If you have any questions, you can either put in the question box given in the end of the webinar console, or you could equally raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon available on the webinar console. So let me go straight to the question box. Lisa, we have a question that is how we can increase our emotional intelligence.
So that's a great question, and I would say that you've started doing it by attending this webinar today. First of all, being aware that emotional intelligence exists, that it includes a set of skills. The next step is that can be very important in developing emotional intelligence can be to do a formal assessment, and we encourage you to reach out to us after the webinar. If you would be interested in exploring that option, you can find an emotional intelligence coach to work with. But one of the first things you can do just for yourself is to be thinking about these emotional intelligence skills that we talked about and identify just one or two that are most important for you right now. And maybe for you it's assertiveness, or maybe it's empathy, or maybe it's exercising your optimism. So I would encourage you to start by identifying one or maybe two of the EQ skills that we talked about and being aware of that and looking for ways to exercise and strengthen that. And feel free to reach out to me afterwards if you'd like some more specific information and skills and activities for that. Thank you. That's a great question.
Thank you, Lisa, for such a great answer. We have another one that is, what is the importance of emotional intelligence in leadership?
It's a great question, and we see that in leadership, when we think back to the beginning of the webinar, we asked that question, you know, who are the leaders that we really admire and respect? And so many of the characteristics and traits of those leaders can be linked to emotional intelligence. And an emotionally intelligent leader is going to be able to relate well to team members, is going to understand the dynamics, is going to be able to create a clear vision, a clear strategy, a compelling strategy. They're going to be able to identify times when the team is discouraged, or maybe the overall energy is low, maybe, you know, we're not being able to be very creative. An emotionally intelligent leader is going to be in tune to these things and going to be searching for ways to be able to address them, to ultimately keep the emotional environment strong and open and healthy, so that the team can function most effectively.
Thank you, Lisa. We have another one by Mr. Murad Mansoor. How to use emotions in a diverse workforce that is coming from different cultures?
This is an excellent question, and one that comes up often. I have taught and talked about emotional intelligence all around the world, and we see that there are some differences in how we use emotional intelligence, and probably most significantly, cultural differences in how we prioritize the different emotional intelligence skills. So, for example, I am originally from the USA, and in America, assertiveness and independence is highly valued. But I have done a lot of work in other cultures, in Southeast Asian cultures, also Middle Eastern cultures, where the collective piece is more important than the independent piece. And so you see that different aspects of emotional intelligence are going to be prioritized in different cultural settings. Now, if you have a multicultural group of people working together, then it's important to recognize those differences in our different cultural backgrounds. The next step, though, is to look at what is the culture of the organization and what is priority to the organization, or even if you want to look smaller, to the team. When we look at our responsibilities and what we need to produce as a team, what is most important? What emotional intelligence skills? And sometimes we have to just recognize this priority for me on the team doesn't come naturally for me, maybe because of my cultural background. But again, remember, EQ is dynamic, so I have that ability to kind of just recognize my own cultural biases and understanding and use of emotional intelligence, and then practice stepping into what's most important for the team. So thank you so much for that question. It is a very interesting experience to talk about this in multicultural settings.
Another question, I'll quickly read it out. How can astrology help us raise the levels of our emotional intelligence?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. I don't have a lot of experience in astrology, but I can relate it a little bit to like understanding our personality. I have more experience there. But understanding ourselves, our natural tendencies, our natural desires, we can, that's part of self-awareness. So it can really influence our understanding of ourselves, which can then impact how we relate to other people, how we relate to ourselves, and make sure that we keep ourselves in a place of strong well-being. So I would be interested to hear from some of you who have more experience with astrology to see how it overlaps. But in my limited knowledge, I would say that it can really help in any tool that we use to understand ourselves more effectively can improve our ability to understand ourselves with the emotional intelligence perspective. Thank you for that question.